The old town stood forgotten. Buildings were crumbling, streets were empty. Thomas shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter. His car had died miles back. No phone signal, no sign of life, just the unsettling silence of a town lost to time. He continued down the main road, desperation growing with each step. The wind howled through the skeletal trees that lined the path. Rain began to fall, icy cold and relentless. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a faint light flickered in the distance. Hope surged through Thomas. He picked up his pace, his eyes fixed on the warm glow. As he drew closer, the outline of a building emerged from the gloom. It was an old inn, its sign barely clinging to the rotting wood. Thomas hesitated, a strange unease creeping over him. But the biting cold and his dwindling hope propelled him forward. He reached the heavy oak door and raised a trembling hand to knock.
The door creaked open before his knuckles could connect. The musty scent of decay washed over him. He peered into the dimly lit interior, his heart pounding in his chest. Hello?
Silence. He stepped inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Cobwebs draped the room like macabre decorations. Dust lay thick on every surface. The air was heavy with the weight of neglect and the lingering scent of damp wood.
Is anyone here?
He called out again, his voice barely a whisper. A floorboard creaked above him, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. Thomas jumped, his pulse quickening. He strained to hear, every nerve on high alert. The sound was not repeated. He took a hesitant step forward, his shoes crunching on the grit beneath his feet. The inn seemed to press in on him, its silence both deafening and unsettling.
You must be freezing, dear.
Thomas whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. A woman stood behind him, her face obscured by the shadows. She wore a long, dark dress that seemed to melt into the gloom around her.
Who are you?
He stammered, his voice trembling. The woman smiled, a slow, unsettling curve of her lips.
I'm Martha, the innkeeper. This place hasn't seen a visitor in years.
Her voice was a low murmur, raspy with disuse. Thomas swallowed hard, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of his neck.
My car broke down. I need to call for help.
Martha glided closer, her movements eerily silent.
There's no phone here, dear, but you're welcome to stay the night. The storm will be raging for hours.
He hesitated, a sense of unease settling over him. Something about her unnerved him, though he couldn't quite place his finger on it. Martha led him through the darkened hallways, her footsteps soundless on the aged floorboards. They reached a dining room where a single candle flickered on a table set for one. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Thomas sat down, his gaze drawn to the elaborate silverware and the steaming bowl of stew placed before him. The aroma was rich and savoury, but it did little to quell the growing unease in his gut. Martha watched him with an unsettling intensity from the shadows. Her eyes, he noticed, seemed to glow with an unnatural light.
Eat, dear, she urged, her voice a silken whisper. You must be famished.
He picked up the spoon, his hand trembling slightly. The stew was surprisingly good, the warmth spreading through him like a balm. Yet with each bite the feeling of dread intensified. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. As the night wore on, the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil brewing within Thomas. He sat by the crackling fire in the main room. His attempts at conversation with Martha met with vague responses and unsettling smiles.
Sighs. Why won't she just say something clear?
He tried to focus on the flames, but the shadows that danced across the walls held his attention captive. They seemed to writhe and whisper, their movements taking on unsettling shapes.
What is happening to me? Are those faces?
Faces appeared and disappeared in the flickering light, their expressions filled with a silent, accusing pain. Thomas rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the hallucinations. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent.
This can't be real. I must be imagining things.
He could almost make out words now, fragments of sentences that sent chills down his spine.
Trapped. Can't leave. Forever.
He spun around, searching for the source of the voices, but the room was empty. Martha was gone.
Martha, where did you go? Driven by a growing sense of dread, I began to explore the inn. Each room I entered was shrouded in dust and decay, yet each was meticulously maintained, as if waiting for a guest who would never arrive. I found myself in a room at the end of the hall. A tarnished mirror hung on the far wall, its surface clouded with age. As I drew closer, I noticed something strange. A face appeared in the reflection, a ghostly visage superimposed over my own. It was a man, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes wide with terror. He seemed to be trapped within the mirror, his hand reaching out as if pleading for help.
Thomas stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. The face in the mirror mouthed a single word, his voice a silent scream.
Run!
Panicked, I stumbled back to the main room. I had to get out of there, escape the oppressive atmosphere and the growing sense of dread that threatened to consume me. As I rushed past the fireplace, I noticed a book lying on the mantel. It was old, its leather cover cracked and faded. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the embossed title, The History of Silent Hollow. I opened the book and began to read. The words swam before my eyes, painting a horrifying picture of the inn's past. It was a place of darkness, where travelers were lured and trapped, their souls bound to the inn for eternity. The book spoke of Martha, a woman consumed by grief after the loss of her family. She had made a pact with a dark entity, trading her soul for the power to keep others trapped within the inn, their life force sustaining her own. I slammed the book shut, my blood running cold. I understood now. The unsettling atmosphere, the whispers, the ghostly face in the mirror, they were all warnings, echoes of the inn's tragic past. I had to get out, escape the inn's clutches before my soul joined the ranks of the forgotten. I raced towards the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached for the handle, it turned ice cold beneath my touch. The door wouldn't budge. It was locked, bolted from the outside. I rattled the handle, my desperation mounting with each passing second. "Let me out!"
Thomas screamed, his voice echoing in the empty inn. Silence met his plea. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing filled the air. He was trapped. He sank to the floor, defeat washing over him. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Shadows stretched and twisted around him, their forms growing more menacing in the absence of light. He could feel their presence now, the trapped souls of the inn's past victims. Their whispers surrounded him, their voices a chorus of despair and resignation.
I closed my eyes, accepting the horrifying truth. I was one of them now, another lost soul claimed by the inn's darkness.
Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling like a banshee. The old inn stood silent and watchful, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. Inside, Thomas was gone, lost to the shadows and whispers that haunted its halls.
The inn waited patiently for its next visitor, its doors forever open, promising shelter and delivering only despair.